Graham. I'm the interim general manager here at the San Antonio River Authority. The River Authority, along with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, really is glad you're here. We're inviting you to learn about the San Pedro Creek Culture Park and this important archaeological discovery that was made in February of 2020. So you'll learn all the details, but in summary, at the corner of Houston Street and Cameron Street, this archaeological find was found. It really consists of 4 different historical elements: the Minger Soapworks, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which we'll kind of refer to as AME, the Alamo Ice House, and the Alamo Ice House and Brewery. Those are 4 different structural features that existed on this site. While the archaeological discovery was a surprise, it actually creates this wonderful opportunity to incorporate this history and culture into the park. And so let me just remind you of the name of the project. It's the San Pedro Creek Culture Park. So it's really kind of a good outcome. We just sort of need to pivot and figure out how to work this into the project. When the discovery was made, our design team started working with design options that had different kinds of preservation in mind. Additionally, we worked with a group of community leaders, history experts to weigh in on the significance and the research of the archaeology. Many of those community members and researchers are actually on this call today. So it's really important to Sarah and the Corps of Engineers and actually Bexar County and the City of San Antonio, because they're partners too, that we get the public's recommendations on the future of this site. There's going to be a lot of information given to you today. There's actually about 7 options, and some of them are subtly different. But they go from an option A, which is full preservation, which essentially preserves but buries the foundation underground. It really has a limited ability to do events or programming along the creek, all the way to option E, which removes portions of that foundation, but then does create this space where the cultural heritage can be actively celebrated with a plaza that would exist down at the creek level. And those options and those pros and cons will be kind of described today. But I want to make it clear that all the design options we're going to be showing you today are meant to celebrate and honor this important cultural history of our community, particularly that of the AME Church. They really just do it in different ways. One is a physical preservation, so you can see that. The other is more in the telling of the history, the storytelling, and programmatic, because you create a space where that storytelling can be done by the community. We've always envisioned this corner really being the most active part of the entire San Pedro Creek Culture Park. All kinds of cultures and history could be told in this plaza. If you're familiar with the Artisan River Theater on the San Antonio River, this would kind of be our smaller equivalent version on San Pedro Creek. So as you're seeing these different options today, I really want you to think about this. There's a lot of decision points around economic development, and because of the floodplain reduction, the public accessibility, public venue for placemaking, but there's also historical preservation, cultural documentation and celebration, and of course cost. All those need your thoughts and ideas so that we can go back and get with decision makers, get with the Corps of Engineers to see what is the best path forward. So again, thank you, all of you, for your time and your input. We're really glad you're here. And Monica, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Steve, and welcome everyone. My name is Monica Trevino Ortega. I am your moderator for this public meeting this afternoon. I manage the community outreach for the San Pedro Creek Culture Park, and I also facilitate the San Pedro Creek Culture Park Citizens Advisory Subcommittee, which meets every second Thursday of the month at 9 a.m. Thank you again for being here. We're going to get started with the presentations here in a bit, and I'd just like to let everyone know that this public meeting is now being recorded. So I'd like to go over a couple of ground rules to ensure an efficient, concise delivery of this very important information, and in order to allow for maximum amount of time to address questions and comments from the public. I kindly ask that all mics be muted throughout the duration of the presentation, and I'll also mute mics manually as needed. So members of the public are welcome to type their questions in the chat box as they come up, and we're going to be able to answer those questions at the end of the presentation in order of submission. Also, if time allows, we'll also take questions for those dialing in over the phone and don't have that option. I'd like to encourage everyone to visit the Archaeological site website, which Ms. Nicole Miller will, she'll be providing that in the chat box for everyone right now. On our website, you can submit your official comments and preference for the site design options, and this is going to ensure that your feedback is officially recorded with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. You'll also find a recording of this presentation, along with the presentation slides and other useful documents pertaining to the research and archaeological report for your convenience on our website. We really encourage members of the public to take a look at the resources offered on the website, in addition to this virtual public meeting, in order to make an informed decision. So just to reiterate, please remember to submit your preference on our website or by email or by writing to the Army Corps of Engineers. We'll provide the email address and website in the chat box, and also we'll provide that at the end of the presentation as well. Now, we have a thorough presentation prepared for you all this afternoon. We'll briefly learn about the project from River Authority engineer Carrie Averett. We'll then hear from Dr. Steve Tomka of Robert Kistner regarding the archaeological site research. Mr. Steve Tillotson of Munoz & Company will then present the various site design options. And then River Authority Public Art Curator, Ms. Carrie Brown, will provide information on the interpretive efforts for the site. And then I will close out the presentation with a quick recap of the public outreach that we've done to date. So now we'll begin our presentation, and please welcome Mr. Carrie Averett, River Authority Design and Construction Department Manager. Take it away, Carrie.
Thank you very much, Monica, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over just a brief overview of the history of the project and talk about the goals of the project and what got us to where we're at right now. I think it's very important to note that this project is a partnership between Bexar County, the City of San Antonio, and the San Antonio River Authority, and it's to improve a little over 2 miles of creek, about 2.2 miles. There's a phase map there. Of course, the segment that we're talking about is shown as segment 2 in phase 1. But the estimated total investment of this is about $298 million. Bexar County is the primary funder, and this is a flood control project. However, our local leaders and elected officials had a vision. Instead of just expanding the channel and having another trapezoidal channel, they wanted to create a public amenity for the people that live and work in San Antonio and Bexar County. As such, there were a series of public input meetings throughout the course of design to get input from the community. And our aim here is to create an amenity that serves our community and tells the history and the culture of San Antonio. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, flood control is really the main goal. San Pedro Creek is a channel that catches about 45.6 square miles of drainage. And that's direct runoff throughout the downtown area, as well as the stormwater collection system that drains into the creek. So even a very small rain event can cause a dramatic rise in the elevation of the surface of the creek. Right now, we have about 30 acres in the downtown area that are flooded during a significant rain event. We're trying to eliminate those flood events. Now, that is not the only project goal. Water quality, of course, is a core value of the San Antonio River Authority. And as such, we have many different features along this project that are going to help clean the water that goes into the creek. Of course, economic development, anytime you have a public works project, if you can see a return, and some economic development, that's always a plus. From the investment in this project, they're estimating about $1.5 billion in return over a 20-year period. Now, as I mentioned, this was very much a grassroots design effort. We had a series of public meetings to get the community involved and get feedback from the public on the design for the project. We ended up making some fairly significant revisions in response to that feedback, but we really want to demonstrate the culture and the history of San Antonio. And Carrie Brown will be talking a little bit later about the interpretive planning effort to do that representation. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about the flood control. What we're doing to accomplish those goals is we're widening and deepening the channel throughout the 2.2 mile stretch. You can see there's some areas where we just widen. In other areas, we have to go a little deeper to get the capacity that we need. Once the project is done, the intent is to contain the 100-year floodplain completely within the channel throughout the entire stretch. Now, also included in the design was additional capacity, and we call it freeboard, above the elevation of the water during a 100-year rain event. We added some room in there for the channel so that we could accept increased flows from future development. There are also some planned city drainage improvement projects north of this particular area that are planned to put some additional flows into the creek to relieve some flooding issues upstream. Ultimately, the goal is to remove approximately 30 acres from the 100-year floodplain, and there are 38 structures that are currently in the floodplain that would be removed. To accomplish this, including the Houston Street Bridge right near the site and subject for this meeting, we're replacing about 8 bridges so that we can get the wider cross area under. Next slide, please. And just real quick, these photos are showing the areas upstream of Houston Street. On the left is the before picture for the floodplain. You can see all along that area, we currently have some flows that jump the banks during a 100-year rain event. After construction, you can see the photo on the right. The intent is that we would contain that floodplain within the channel. Next slide, please. So in early 2020, I believe it was around March, when they were doing construction near the corner of Houston and Cameron Street, there next to the Alameda Theater, they started to uncover some foundations. And as we continued to investigate and the archaeologists got in there and continued to work with the contractor to uncover, we discovered it was a series of foundations, and there are several there. Now, the design of this area included a large open plaza, and you can see the rendering in the lower right on this slide. That was a result of feedback from the community and from stakeholders. And really, this was to be a focal point of the project. Now, this discovery has stopped us so that we can see how we can incorporate the foundations into our design. And the design team have come up with several options that incorporate some or all of the foundation, also taking into account the project goals. And one thing that I think is very important is that we believe all the goals do represent a good historic, have a good historic representation of what happened in this area. We think that they all have a good representation and represent the culture and history of everything that happened here. The question is, which option will incorporate all of the goals and meet all the goals to the best degree possible. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now we're going to move on into the archaeological site research by Dr. Steve Tomka of Robert Kistner.
All right, thank you, Monica. Let's go to the first slide, please. So this slide shows basically the foundations as we uncovered them about a year ago now, and it outlines in different colors the 4 components that Mr. Graham had mentioned earlier. And each component, as you will see, starting with the soapworks and followed by the AME Church and the Ice Factory component and the later Ice Factory Brewery components, basically increase in size as the complex increases. And again, as we're looking at the slide, San Pedro Creek is at the top of the slide, and Camarón Street or Cameron Street is at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. A quick run through the timeline. We are looking basically at a total length of occupation and use of this area that we are interested in, that is represented by these foundations, of roughly 57 years. Each component runs from anywhere from 6 years in length to 12 years in length, and really cover that 57-year period, beginning in 1847 and ending in 1904. When most of the complex is torn down and filled in, and later a parking lot is built on top of it. Next slide, please. The very first, the oldest component, the occupation as we refer to it in archaeology, dates from 1847 to 59, and it is the soap factory component associated with the Klemke and Menger families. These are two immigrant German families who came to this country during the middle of the 19th century, right about the time when hygiene standards were increasing in the country following the Civil War and the large number of deaths resulting from various infections on the battlefield. And so when they arrived, the need for soap and increased hygiene was already present in the country, and they occupied a really important role both in Texas and in San Antonio specifically by the manufacture of soap, not just for their own use, but also for use by the larger population. The first to own the property was Mr. Klemke. He sold it in 1851. During the period that he owned it, he potentially built two structures on the side, and then sold it in 1851 to Simon Menger, not related to the Menger who owned the hotel. And then Mr. Menger owned it until 1859, when a flood of San Pedro Creek might have damaged one or both of those structures, and he moved his soap making facility further north on the creek, but he continued owning the property into the early 1870s. Next slide, please. In 1871, approximately 3 or 4 years after the establishment of the St. James African Methodist Episcopal Church in San Antonio, the congregation purchases a portion of, rents actually a portion of the AME church or the soap factory. We suspect that it's only a couple of rooms or one of the rooms maybe that is being rented. By 1873, the congregation decides to purchase the entire property, and in 1875 they take out a contract to enlarge the property, reflecting throughout these stages, reflecting basically the increase in the congregation. And what's important to remember here is that we are speaking of a congregation made up primarily of formerly enslaved individuals and freed Black individuals who were looking really for a place to call their own, a place that they could establish their own religious freedom, and basically a place within the San Antonio society where they can pursue social justice. Basically, these were the early days of the social justice movement as we know it, quickly or shortly after emancipation and during the Reconstruction era. And what you see in the inset here is the small picture showing the cornerstone of the former church that was placed there in July 25th of 1875 when the enlargement of the building began. Next slide, please. By 1878, the church moves out. It abandons the structure in 1877 in favor of a new building that is being erected near the old church. In 1878, the structure, on Cameron Street, is already owned by the Alamo Ice Company. They make artificial ice, which is another significant industrial activity, in part because the harvesting of natural ice had come to a stop during the Civil War, and many individuals, entrepreneurs, were trying to figure out how to manufacture ice, both to improve food preservation and food transportation across the country. So in the late part of the 19th century, Texas and San Antonio really are at the forefront of artificial ice manufacture, and the Alamo Ice Company represents one of the first companies in town to manufacture ice, imports some of the sort of top-of-the-line new equipment that is being used for ice manufacture. And so industrially, it represents a pretty major step in the industrial history of San Antonio itself, just as much as the birth of the AME Church in San Antonio represent a significant religious congregational activity for the African American community and for religious activities in general. Next slide, please. By 1887, the Alamo Ice Company merges with, or has a marriage basically with beer brewing. At this time, German beer brewing, lager beer brewing in particular, takes an important role in the States. However, because it needs a cold fermentation, which is only allowed through ice and cooling, the ice manufacturer beer brewing become a natural partners in the industrial manufacture of industrial process basically, and many ice manufacturing facilities couple with beer brewing to become this new, very efficient new enterprise that allows for the growth of German beer brewing in the country. And as you can see in the inset, not only does the beer brewing ice manufacturer facility increases in size, but it's very significant increase in both directions to the north and south of the core of the building, which is the center part, which is the old AME church. There are additions to the north, to the west, as well as to the south of the building, and the original building itself, the AME church, gets repurposed, broken up into various different compartments internally for the industrial process, and new equipment is added in that process as well. Next, please. By 1898, the Alamo Brewery owns the facility basically. At this point, it begins to get enlarged even more so. Eventually, the footprint of the entire enterprise reaches West Houston Street, the frontage of West Houston Street. And throughout both of these enlargements, the Alamo Ice and Brewing Company and the Alamo Brewery, the building becomes a three-story structure rather than a single-story structure that it used to be when the AME Church occupied the structure, the complex itself. This three-story structure was apparently designed by Alfred Childs, who is one of the critical locally, state, and nationally, internationally known architects that served the Texas community as well as Mexico, worked in northern Mexico. And what is interesting is that not only was he famous and contributed to the architecture of the three-story building, but so did a number of individuals back in the day when the building was owned by the AME Church and served as a church. Many of the trustees of the church itself were community members that played a significant role in San Antonio's larger community, served the community in various capacities, both locally as well as they were instrumental and critical really in the founding of the AME African Methodist Episcopal congregations across the state, and several of those individuals, pastors, became nationally known, national leaders in the AME Church, serving as bishops across the country in various capacities. So both the architect that comes later, during the Alamo Brewing period, as well as the individuals that served the church community, were influential and important both at the local, at the state, and at the national level. So that is a very important factor to remember. Next slide, please. So then when we're considering the significance of the site regarding the National Register eligibility, as well as the State Antiquities Landmark designation, there are a number of criteria that we have to take into consideration. Criterion A relates to the events and specific historic trends that may have occurred associated with the site. Criterion B deals with individuals, as we said, that are important both to the local history, to the history of the site, state history, national history. Criterion C refers to architectural importance, architectural significance of the design itself. And then criterion D addresses archaeological significance of the remains. And this is an archaeological site because it's found below the ground, but it still could contain significant archaeological deposits. So we have to evaluate it both in terms of all those other criteria as well as criterion D. And as we are evaluating the site, we have to look at each component separately by itself. And in our research, aided by the research of individuals from several offices, the Office of Historic Preservation, the UTSA researchers, Clint McKenzie particularly, as well as members of the African Community Archives and Museum, we have developed and defined basically that the two older components, the soap factory as well as the AME church, are eligible for listing under criterion A and B, as well as D to the National Register, as well as the AME church is also eligible for listing to the National Register for listing under criterion A, B, and D. And similarly, both of those components warrant formal listing as state antiquities landmarks, in part again because of their association with these industrial activities and trends, with their significance related to the religious establishment of the AME church, its flourishing in the community, and then also because both of those components might retain archaeological materials buried still below the ground within the footprint of the AME church that may give us more detail about the early days of these very formative events in the history of San Antonio and in the state. On the other hand, when we considered the ice factory component, Alamo Ice Company, as well as the brewing component, which contained those two different breweries, we felt that the integrity of the archaeological component is lacking. There is no clear association between artifacts and any of those industrial activities. There are still foundations, but some of the foundations that were part of the larger site, which extended to Houston Street, are entirely gone. They are not available any longer. And there really is no sort of archaeological set of materials and the integrity of archaeological materials that associate with those components that are still intact within the boundaries of the site itself. And so because of those negatives, we felt that basically those two components are not eligible, in our opinion, for listing on the National Register, nor warrant formal designation as an SAL or state antiquities landmarks. And so it was a combination of the significance, and more importantly, not so much the significance, but in the case of the integrity of those components, the integrity was lacking to allow us to move forward and recommend those two components for listing to the National Register. So I will stand by, and I understand that there might be questions at the end of the entire meeting, so I'll stand by to answer any questions that come up. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Tonka. And I'd just like to remind everyone, if questions come up, any comments, feel free to put them in the comment box. Ms. Nicole Marshall has also graciously provided the link for our website and other ways that you can submit your feedback in the chat box. So be sure to check that out. We'll now move on to the design options from Steve Tillotson of Munoz & Company. Steve, go ahead.
Thank you. Everybody can hear me? Okay, great. Just having some technical difficulties, but I'm glad. Really, in the beginning of the design of the project, and certainly this area, we were very much aware that the AME Church was at a location in this particular area. And we did acknowledge that early on, and certainly had a design that acknowledged its presence in terms of interpretive signage, and also a pattern in the paving that was our best approximation at the time of where the church walls actually existed along the sidewalk on Cameron Street. But nevertheless, in terms of the events that have come about, we've had to look at a different response now that there is not just a memory, but an artifact of the AME Church and associated history with it before and after. And so we did look at a series of different ideas, different options on how to go about basically preserving or interpreting or both the AME church and the soapworks. And so we went through a series of options. I'll move on to the next slide because I think as we go through that, it explains it a little bit as easier. But I did want to note that in most of the design options, the foundations that are preserved will be buried. And then only surface interpretations of the foundations would be actually visible or seen by the public. And aside from the first option that you see, which is option A, the remaining design options really remove all of the other foundations other than the AME church and the soapworks factory. So as we look at an option A, which would completely redesign the current plaza area that we have there now, we would look at basically trying to encircle and protect all of the foundations that are there presently. And that's what this plan shows. North is to the left, going upstream on the creek. Cameron Street is on the top, and Alameda Theater is on the lower part of this plan, and that'll be the same for all of these. And in this particular approach, if we were to do that, we would actually have to go back in and narrow the channel that we've widened at this point, and actually have to, just to allow some degree of flow through the area, we'd have to take out the West Bank Paseo that has already been constructed along Alameda Theater. So that's what this represents. Essentially, we'd still have to take care of the exiting that comes out of the east east wall of the Alameda Theater, bridging across to the East Bank on the north and south. We would have to redesign the restrooms, probably be just a single restroom and not the restrooms that we have now, and rethink really how we treat the surface area of this particular scheme. If we could go to the next slide. And so the impacts on this, we show this right up front to know that if we try to keep everything that's there, it really doesn't meet the flood control project goals at all. It leaves no capacity in the channel to accept flows from future development. And there's already projects already planned to alleviate flooding upstream neighborhoods. That's very similar for many of the projects, and Carrie Aver had mentioned that earlier. And that any kind of flood events over 100 years is going to not be contained in the channel. And gaining the lost flood control would require substantial disruption of the preserved foundations, either to bore a tunnel beneath or to temporarily relocate the foundations to allow installation of culverts below the foundations. So trying to mitigate the possible negative impacts on this is a very difficult challenge. In doing that, basically we had a plaza, we still have the plaza design, but it would limit the capacity for events and programs that have already been designed. It would have the potential to reduce the amount of pedestrian traffic, less exposure to the history of the site, and we totally lose contact with the creek itself. It'd all be at a high bank. We would not have a low bank paseo, and that kind of intimacy of interacting with people and nature was something that was very important to this. The financial impact is considerable. Thereabouts of $4 million to basically go about making all of the changes to accommodate keeping the entire foundations. So that sums up kind of our option A if we were to keep everything, and we can go on to look at a couple other options. Next slide. So option B, basically this is the existing plaza design, and what you see in the top towards the right in the kind of the orangey, that's the orangey area, that is the footprint of the AME church as it exists at the street level. The plaza itself steps down about 7 feet below the street level, and that about another 5 or 6 feet down to the water level. So this is kind of a mid-level plaza, and it would be carved into essentially what are the foundations of the AME church. We show this because before we just had a surface treatment in terms of the paving for the footprint of the church. But in light of seeing the artifacts and knowing now really the gaining significance of the memory of this church and the history that it had, we felt like making it a little bit more special rather than just a change of paving pattern would be important. So option B1 shows raising up a low wall, kind of bench height around it, just to kind of buffer it off from the rest of the sidewalk. And option B2 would be the idea that you would say actually excavate around the foundations and then have some sort of a really elegant glass viewable walkway where you could look down on the foundations from the surface level. Both of those are two different approaches, but basically dealing with the footprint of the AME church at the street level and not having any impact on or marginal impact on the current design. And if you look at the next slide from this, really the impacts are on that would be marginal. And I just lost the screen. The impacts on that would be marginal. We may pick that up in a later slide in comparison. But we moved on from that to think about something more substantial, because when you do see the history and you do see the actual archaeological site, you begin to understand the entirety of the church itself. And so for that reason, we looked at a series of options that basically tries to preserve as much of the foundations as possible, if not all, of the AME church and soapworks, but also to be able to see at the street level the full extent of its footprint on the ground, you know, the width and the length of it, to see what kind of space people, and imagine what kind of space people were congregating in. To do that, you have to retain those foundations, not unlike the first option, but a little bit more tightly. And so there's a very serious 6 foot thick kind of pier wall out of concrete that has to be on its north and west and south sides to protect those foundations from caving in and protect them from the flows of the river, the creek as it rises up. And again, that footprint is about 40 feet by 60 feet. It would be the foundation walls would be preserved underground and they'd be interpreted on the site. One of the unfortunate things of this is it does have impact on the flow, but it also would not allow the low bank paseo, which comes under Houston Street, to be able to go to the ramp that is over on the south or right-hand side of this plan. So we would have to use up most of the rest of the site just bringing a ramp up to the street level. And so all of that starts to be a lot of work to and really kind of undo some of the capabilities or attributes of the previous plan. But it does show the entire church intact. You can see in the lower left-hand corner, a little thumbnail rendering showing the rectangular footprint of the church, the surrounding protecting concrete abutments, and then of course the handicapped or accessible ramp coming up from the low bank to the high bank. We can move on to another alternate on this, which would be the next slide. And so this was to do two things. It was to try to keep as much of the foundations as possible. Certainly that would still show a fairly full extent of the church footprint, just to kind of understand its place in the space of along Cameron Street. But we would cut off the lower left-hand corner of it, essentially the northwest corners, and that would allow two things: the low bank paseo to continue on and engage a accessible ramp as it had been close to what had been originally designed. And it also does start to capture back some of the impacts on the flood control on the conveyance through there. Now, we didn't do an entire new flood study on it, so I'm not saying that this totally alleviates it, but it certainly may have still some impact, but it is an improvement upon the option we just previously saw. And instead of have a ramp coming up or the street level, just having a grassy bank on the north side between Houston Street on the left and the AME Church on the right. And that is our second example. And then we came up with one more in this variation of the next slide, which should reveal. And that is to basically still keep the full footprint by cantilevering a new structure out over that cut back corner that you see. We do have to start doing some other things like lowering the grade elevations of the low bank paseo, having a little steeper slope on the grass. We have to actually raise up our walking surface at the footprint of the church by about 6 inches, just to get all the clearances and height and everything to make that work. But we thought that this is kind of a useful compromise between still accommodating some flood control goals and also showing the full extent of the church footprint and about 75 to 80% of the foundation walls that are there. So that is option. And you can see in the lower left-hand corner that, again, that the thumbnail is showing that little cantilever out there to try to keep the footprint intact. Next slide, please. So on those impacts, just to kind of sum up, still doesn't entirely meet project flood control goals. I think the C.1 is more severe than the others. Again, really repeating some of those same issues that we have in A, that doesn't leave a little or no capacity of the channel except flows. The 100-year could still spill out over the channel on adjacent properties. But in terms of some of the cultural and social impacts, it does change the capacity for events and programs. There is an assembly space essentially within the footprint of the church at that point. But how it's used, it's not as ideal a performance space. It's at street level. It's not below, so there's noise issues and things like that. So it's a little more difficult. It's not as ideal, and it really is not a performance space, although it's a reasonable gathering space for some events. Of course, in option 1, C1, there was all ramp and footprint of the church, but C2 and C3 add some green lawn and retains the low paseo, so a little more desirable. And all of those are really pretty much in the same financial impact range, about 2.2 million to 2.3 million. So let's move on to several other options that we looked at. And in these two options, we attempted to do something that is a little bit of a hybrid of retaining foundation walls and also looking at interpreting the footprint of the church, but still trying to maintain to some degree the existing plaza design and function. And in option D, essentially that is raising up, showing the perimeter of the wall around on the north and east and south sides along Cameron Street, but extending the footprint of it, the floor area, if you will, of the church, out over the terrace, the stone terraces that we have along the perimeter of the plaza. And the level of this would actually be lower, the street level. It would be closer to the actual level, floor level of the historic church at this point. Because keep in mind that the grade level historically is about 3 to 4 feet higher than it was 150 years ago. So this actually gets you down to the level, close to the level of the church floor, and then would expose the historic foundation walls around it, or actually walls at that point, because you're at the historic floor level. And then it's more and more engaged and sequestered from the street level, but more and more engaged with the plaza. And then the perimeter of the church would be inlaid stone to complete that through the plaza, and then perhaps just a modification of the railing along the low bank paseo to kind of indicate that northwest corner. So it's actually the idea that it's kind of draped over the plaza area. And option E is similar, but it keeps it at the floor plate at the street level, and just staggers the footprint kind of into the terraced stone seating that goes around it. and would be inlaid with stone to carry it through the plaza, low bank paseo over to the creek level. So that's kind of an interesting hybrid that we thought we needed to be investigated for people to think about as well. If we move on to the next slide, kind of the impacts of those last three that we looked at, they do, of course, all maintain the project flood control goals. That was the intent of investigating those. It does maintain the intended event use for the Alameda Theater, Texas Public Radio, River Authority. It provides the seating and shade that's needed. It's still a large public gathering place below the street noise and in closer contact with the water, et cetera. And it is ADA accessible for the low bank paseo. It keeps that intact. And there is a range of costs on this. Really kind of the first two, which were really just keeping the plaza as is. The first one that was more simple, just under 900,000. The other about 1.3 million. For the last two that we looked at, the D and the E, where it's more of a hybrid condition, both of them basically about $1.2 million. The next slide.
All right, Steve, those were all the slides on the design options. Thank you.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Now we'll move on to interpretive strategies with Ms. Carrie Brown, Public Art Curator.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to take a quick couple of minutes to go through the interpretive strategies that we have implemented at the park and continue to implement as different sections open. So next slide. So first I wanted to start with our interpretive panels, a photo of which you can see on the right here. These are currently implemented at the park. We currently have 18 of them. And the topics for these panels come from our interpretive plan, which we completed last year with the help of a group of community experts. I believe Monica is going to touch on that briefly in her presentation. But just to say that one way we can interpret information here at this site particularly is to have a panel dedicated to that site, and that is our intention. All of our panels are written by local historians, and then as needed we bring in subject matter experts to correct for accuracy and also to provide some additional information. And then we also take all of our panels to the Bexar County Historical Commission for a final review. So that's one strategy that we have implemented and will continue to use. Another strategy is digital delivery of information, and this includes our website, which is sbcculturepark.com. And this is a place where we can include a whole slew of information for those who want to kind of take a deeper dive. We can also link to other resources and organizations that are out there, again, providing that deeper level of information for those who are interested. And this also includes our mobile app as well, which you can download for free. We currently have a self-guided tour that coincides with the interpretive panels that we have. And as more sections of the park open, we'll continue to add to that mobile app. And the app also has an audio component as well. So again, another layer that we can add to this information that we're trying to share with the public. And then we also have on-site programming and educational opportunities. Like most organizations, we've had to convert all of that to a virtual format during the pandemic. And I'll touch on some of our ongoing programs in just a minute. But I wanted to mention just some ideas that we have kicked around that relate particularly to this site. Things like docent-led tours, perhaps walking tours between the existing the current location of the St. James Church and this site. It's only about a mile away. Other ideas include music or dance performances featuring contemporary Black performers, guest lectures and panel discussions that could be in partnership with Texas Public Radio or the Alameda Theater, both right across from the site. Hands-on art activities or storytelling events for children, culinary experiences featuring local Black chefs, film screenings. There's certainly a number of agencies that we could partner with related to that. So those are just some ideas, certainly not an exhaustive list. There are organizations like the National Park Service that offer guidance and resources on developing educational programming and celebratory events for historically significant sites. So we would certainly lean on best practices and our local community as well to help develop that content. And then last but not least, we also have permanent and temporary public artworks, some of which are historical in nature and speak to the interpretive plan that I mentioned briefly. And so that's just another strategy that we have to tell the story of San Pedro Creek. Next slide, please. So these are some of our current ongoing events and programs that we have at the Creek. We have a Monday night yoga class that we've been doing for a couple of years now. We also have a drum circle that we do quarterly. We have an annual holiday event called Illume that happens in December. And we also have another annual event, Creek Fest, that happens in the spring. And then the three in the middle are new series that we launched last year. Fit and Flow offers instructional classes on fitness and health and well-being. We have Get Creative, which features our local creative community. And then we have Creekside Chats, which is more of our educational programming. So these are certainly venues that we could utilize as it relates to this site in particular. But again, you know, it can be expanded upon as necessary for sure. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to touch on briefly, I mentioned we have permanent and temporary public art installations. The images on the left are two projects that are currently installed at the open part of the park. The top is our largest mural and actually won a National Public Art Award. On the bottom are ceramic installations at the bridges. And then the two images on the right are renderings of projects that are coming up. The top image on the right is part of the section that's under construction right now, and actually just south of the site that we are talking about today. This will be our first interactive artwork. And then the other one at the bottom right is actually a special commission by Bexar County to celebrate the 300-year anniversary of the city and county. And so these are coming up. Of course, these are all permanent projects, but we also have temporary installations, which is another avenue for us to tell the story of the Creek. And that's all I've got for today.
Great, thank you very much, Carrie. Alrighty, so I'm just going to move on and talk briefly about our previous efforts of public involvement on the archaeological site in general. We completed an interpretive plan for San Pedro Creek Culture Park that was executed by Dr. Ann Toxey of Toxey McMillan and Associates, as Carrie had mentioned a little while ago. The interpretive plan is an initial step in the planning and design process for informal learning-based institutions like parks and other cultural facilities, where interpretation is used to communicate messages and stories and information and experiences. So it's a decision-making process that blends management needs and resource considerations, visitor needs, and the desires to determine the most effective way to communicate a message. It definitely incorporates elements of culture and history, and it guides the design of the project and also complements the master public art plan. So this effort entailed an extensive process for researching and collaboration, and it was a good year and a half in the making. And for the interpretive plan effort, Carrie Brown and I facilitated a committee of 21 members of the community, ranging from historians, community leaders, and appointed subject matter experts. They provided guidance to Dr. Toxey on the interpretive plan and the interpretive sign topics. And the AME Church, Soapworks, Alamo Ice House and Brewery, and Klumpke, they were all topics that were most definitely included in the interpretive plan and the interpretive signage and fully recognized and vetted by this group. And this was all before the archaeological discovery. So shortly after the discovery, Carrie Brown and I, along with the project team, facilitated a focus group at the direction of Bexar County leadership. And the initial members of this focus group later grew a little bit after the first meeting. So the focus group consists of AME Church leadership, historians, and African American community experts, and they provided additional resources and feedback to the project team, the Texas Historic Commission, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers regarding the archaeological site. So we'd like to commend the focus group for the amazing work that they've done and thank them for their time and efforts for this very important project. Their early contributions were extremely notable and necessary in the research stage of this effort. Actually, a couple of members of the focus group were also on the interpretive plan committee as well. So we've been preparing internally over the last 2 months for a comprehensive outreach strategy for the public notice period. Most importantly, we wanted to ensure that we deliver all this information in the most easily digestible format so that the public can confidently provide feedback on the future of the site. And the River Authority, along with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, are providing 2 public meetings, as we stated earlier. The second one will be scheduled on February 16th. We'll also have a comprehensive webpage dedicated to this effort. I encourage everybody again to go ahead and take a look at that, explore the page. You're going to find a recording of this virtual meeting in case you miss anything. You'll also find more in-depth resources regarding the archaeological research, interpretive efforts, and all the design options you saw here today in greater detail. So our website contains possibly the easiest avenue to submit your preference on the site, and it also ensures that your feedback gets officially documented so that everything is recorded. We also had direct mailers go out within a mile of the site in the current St. James AME Church. We've also put this information on our dedicated email databases and utilize the databases of our community partners, including Bear County, the City of San Antonio, and appropriate districts, all local government representatives, constituent lists, Texas Public Radio fan base, and many, many other community partners that we've tapped to help spread this information. We've also had a decent media presence and coverage of the archaeological site since March of last year. And we're very grateful to continue to have the media mention all the ways that the public can find out more information on the site. And as I mentioned just a little while ago, our next virtual public meeting is February 16th from 6 to 7:30. And please note that the public notice period goes on through March 8th. So you have until March 8th to submit your official feedback to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I also just wanted to mention that we can also send comments, written comments, to the Army Corps of Engineers. And you can also email directly the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for your comments. And for any other questions about access to the information, if you have issues downloading any of the resources on the website, or if you need translation services, anything like that, just please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is here. I'm always happy to help. And I actually wanted to kind of turn it over to Ms. Leslie Crippen of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers quickly. I'd like her to say hello. Leslie, are you online? She may be having some difficulties. I know earlier she wanted to make a couple of comments here. Oh, there you are. Oh, I don't think we can hear you. We can see you. Let's see. So we can see you, we just can't hear you. I think you were dialed in on the phone too. I'm sorry, we still can't hear you, Leslie. All right, folks, we apologize for the technical difficulties here. But again, here's her contact information. And this is how you can submit your official comments on your preference on the site design. I know, Leslie, I know you're trying. All right, how about we can move on to this. I'll move on to comments from the public now. We do have a couple of comments here. And the first one we have is from Ms. Rachel Swinsky, and she says, because slavery formally arrived and was briefly considered lawful during the Republic of Texas and Confederacy, it would be appropriate to designate African American heritage trails connecting historical markers with interpretive storyboards with specific wayfinding design, connecting St. Paul United Methodist Church and the school where the Alamo Plaza and the excavated foundation of the location of St. James African Methodist Episcopal Church. Okay. Yes, thank you very much, Rachel. I believe you had one more comment on here, and she says treatment of historic sites by City of San Antonio in particular has been often counterproductive by inclusion of invasive plant species, which make Main Plaza appear to be in Asia rather than Texas. San Antonio River Authority has been great in using regional native plants, and so I hope this project will use appropriate plant selections. The schematic showed palm trees for designs. I know Sabinal mexicana is native to San Antonio and would be appropriate, whereas the poisonous sago palms in Main Plaza are not. Also, palms are plants and in the grass family. Very important to note, they're not trees. Okay. Thank you very much, Rachel, for your comments. Those have been recorded. Let's see, we also have Laura. She says she just wanted to say that there are still lots of Klempkes in the SA area. The Klempkes were in the Castro colony, but moved further east, and they still live throughout Bexar County, but especially in the Somerset and Von Ormy area, where the Homestead House still stands near the farmlands that Klempke patented from the state. Thank you, Laura, for your comments. All right. And we also have Dr. Tomka. I believe Dr. Tomka responded. This is great to hear. We need to rely on those family connections and histories to really anchor the history of San Antonio to meaningful and personal histories. He looks forward to reaching out to the members of the family and mining that gold mine. Thank you very much for the heads up. And then Lisa Santos says, don't forget the soldiers and families of 1718. Yes, ma'am. In our interpretive plan, we did have a member of the 1718 group as part of representation on the interpretive plan committee. And so they are, it is recorded and it's included in the interpretive plan. Okay, and lastly, we have Cynthis Rogers. Just an FYI, Reverend Alvin Smith is the current pastor of the St. James AME Church. That's correct. He is part of our focus group, and he's been a great help and a great supporter of these efforts. All right. Leslie, is that you?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, ma'am. Take it away.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I don't want to take much time. I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to participate today. This is, of course, part of the federally required step of the Section 106 process requiring public involvement. But to me, it is by far one of the most important steps. It gives us the opportunity to understand the views of the public whose heritage we're meant to protect. So I really appreciate everybody's time today. We've had nearly 100 participants. I know a lot of folks on here are, you know, closely involved with the project and such, but to have so many folks take the time, I really appreciate it, and I hope that you'll utilize the opportunities to make comments. There are several avenues available, but I just want to ensure everybody that we have confirmed that all those different comment avenues do come directly to the Corps. So whichever avenue you choose to use, please just share your opinion, and it will be taken into account when we do the development and approval of the final avoidance and mitigation plan. So thank you, and that's all.
All right, thanks very much, Leslie. We have another comment from Deborah. She says, thank you for the presentation. This is an important find, and we should be celebrated to the same degree of other Anglo-focused historic sites. Please keep that in mind when you present and comment. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Deborah. And Letty also says, excellent presentation. Thank you so much for all agencies for making this presentation possible. Ms. Kay Hines also notes that the project is entitled the San Pedro Creek Culture Park. Therefore, it would seem viable to preserve as much as possible of the significant history and archaeology along the route. Thank you. Thank you, Kay. All right, so it's 5:04 right now. We have until 5:30 today, so we can now allow comments from the public, anybody who's on the line and not able to comment in the chat box. You can now unmute your mic if you have any questions for the design team, for the archaeology team. Now is the time. I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes or seconds to gather themselves, unmute their mic. I just wanted to mention again, this presentation is recorded, and we're going to upload this on our website in case you missed anything or if anybody would like to revisit any of this information.
Monica?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes. Hello, Mr. Jerry Geyer. Welcome. This is our co-chair of our Citizens Advisory Subcommittee.
Yes, good presentation. And now with the February 16th public workshop be exactly the same thing?
Yes, sir. It will be the same information. We just
So
want.
there'll be,
Go ahead.
well, how will we see or be able to see the various comments that'll be sent in before the deadline in March that you accumulate? Will we be able to look at those as well, at least the subcommittee?
So we will record any comments on the public meetings. All other comments and official submissions are going straight to the Army Corps of Engineers. And Leslie, I don't know if you want to comment on those submissions.
Sure. So encouraging the continuation of feedback is an important part of the process. So I do think that it would be beneficial to share comments on the website. You know, at this point, there is not an additional comment period planned. And so there would not be an additional formal period after the March deadline. But to the extent that we can share comments that have been submitted in the meantime, I'm in support of that and don't have any problem with that. So, you know, Sarah have the best mechanism to provide that. And so, you know, assuming that that they can provide that platform, you know, that's how that would be operated.
Okay, I brought that up because in our previous public meetings, and Steve Tillotson underlined it, and so did Steve Graham, we had quite a bit. There were physical public meetings, right? So we gave these kind of presentations that were conceptual designs at first, and then later they were much more focused on what we were going to actually try to do. And we had a lot of inputs from people. A lot of them were written down. A lot of them were vocal. And the people, we were able to capture those. And the Citizens Oversight Committee that we have, the advisory committee, it's important for us to know what the input from the citizens have been. So when we look at the progress, we know what the design is. We know what the county's been looking for. We know what we ourselves have looked at. We get feedback from various things. So having feedback on this particular item from the public is extremely important to us because we're, you know, that's what we're looking for. And the second part is I'm particularly sensitive about getting the feedback from the special panel that was the members of the special panel that was created for this particular thing that Tommy Calvert was initiated and so forth. I'm very interested in what the people who are the stakeholders for this particular part of our culture have to say about the design options, Monica. So, I mean, they don't have to say it now. I'm just saying I'm very interested in seeing what their inputs are and since it's their heritage and culture and their inputs to begin with, I'm interested in seeing what their choices are. Okay?
Absolutely. Yes, we will work on that.
I know you will. I know you will. I just wanted to go ahead and say that now. And so, again, I think it's an excellent presentation and very well done, and especially considering the medium that we have to work with right now. I would make one comment based on my own experience, is that it is very difficult to convey to people something that's no longer there. Someone who studies the history of San Antonio and has been fortunate enough to find illustrations and maps and people that recreate illustrations of what original buildings around what we now call Main Plaza, the original city houses of the Canary Island settlers were on the Plaza de las Islas Canarias, which is what we call the main plaza now. And so we know what it looked like. We know where those people lived and we know what it looked like, but there's nothing left there. And the only thing that's left of the military plaza, the Plaza de Armas, is the refurbished governor's palace. At least there's something there, and you can begin to tell people what the rest look like. So regarding something like the AME Church, we have to find a way to project to people the images. Anything that's verbal is not going to do it. We've got to have the images. And so we have to have images even to the point, if it was possible, what is sometimes done is a model is made out of bronze or something. And that model shows the footprint and the building and everything that we're trying to convey, right? We do have one photograph, right? One photograph of the front of that church where it was located. Something like that at least allows people to stand there when they're talking about it and point out where the buildings were in relationship to the creek and where the creek was. So anything that we can do to have visual impact is very important. That's my own experience, my own feeling. It's very hard to convey it otherwise. But it's a good job, and we'll see where it goes. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Jerry. I just wanted to mention we did have a response to Miss Rachel's comments about the trees, and our project construction manager checked the plans, and we are calling out Sabal Mexicana palms. So just wanted to add that. Are there any other questions or comments from the public right now for our design team or our archaeological team? Any other requests for information or documents? All right.
I have a question about whether or not the report is available for review.
Yes, ma'am. It is available and it is on the website. If you'd like, I can also mail it to you if needed. If you'd like a physical copy of that, I can get your contact information and we can send that if you'd like. But it is available and it is on the website right now.
Okay, so the archaeological report is on the website, or the entire archaeological report is published on the website?
Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Oh, the entire report.
Yes, Kay, the entire report.
Okay, all right, on the Sarah website.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. So the entire report is available for the public to review. It is in a draft format, and we welcome comments on the report as well as on the information that's been presented here today. But the summary, of course, was presented as part of the public notice as a method to give sort of a concise summary. But certainly the rest of the report offers a lot more context and can be downloaded.
Oh, okay, that's what I was interested in, Leslie, was actually the entire report, not just a summary or you know, something, the actual report. Because I was interested in why the other components are not considered eligible to the National Register. So maybe I just don't have enough information on that, but as to why they're not considered or determined eligible.
Sure. So, and I can let Steve speak to that, or you know, if you want to just take some more time to look at the report and formalize any questions. Essentially, it centers around the remaining integrity of those elements.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen any report, so I would love to see a copy of the report, Leslie.
Sure.
Yes, ma'am. We'll make sure.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to note that we have one more comment from Ms. Rogers, and she says, as a lifelong member of St. James AME Church, I'm very happy to see that you all are doing such great work to preserve the history of this church. I will share this information as much as possible. Thank you, Ms. Rogers. We are working with Reverend Al Smith also to get more information out to the church members as well. We want to make sure that we capture everyone's preference and that everyone gets a chance to voice their opinion. So thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments from members of the public? And Ms. Nicole Marshall also put our the link to our website on here as well. If you wanted to take a look at that archaeological report, if you wanted to take a look at any other resources, go ahead and visit our link. And then Ms. Amy Shaw says, thank you for understanding that this find and its preservation is central to San Antonio history and important to all of San Antonio. Yes, ma'am. We agree. Thank you, Amy. All right. If there are no other questions, I'll give just a couple more seconds for anyone else that would like to chime in or needs anything clarified. Okay. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This was really good feedback. We got some really good comments. And again, make sure that your comments are submitted directly to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers through the website. They can be written at this address, and they can also be emailed. We look forward to hearing your feedback and your site preferences. And if you want, you can join us again on February 16th at 6 p.m. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you again for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Bye, Monica. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for all of your work. I appreciate y'all.
Yes,
It was a
ma'am.
wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.